Hello, how you doing? Okay. Anyway, many thanks to all of you who've been buying my book. I'm really grateful, and thank you for the lovely feedback that I've been getting on Amazon. I've been getting 5-star reviews, and I'm really proud of that. So thank you so much. Anyway, this is another case discussion from the 1980s. So just to remind you, these are real cases that took place in the 1990s. Some of the details are altered slightly to protect the identity of the people concerned, and I changed the name. I don't give out particularly specific information, but the whole object is to give you real life stories of things that can occur, and I think it's quite interesting and a learning point for all of us as to what goes on and what can happen and what sort of cases can come to court. So some of the cases I've discussed have been quite serious, and today's is at the other extreme. It's quite low, I feel, and but I have concerns about this case, and I'll explain that. So all too often, it's all very easy for us to get annoyed and angry and cross about offences occurring, and to say, right, they should go to jail. But this case involves the damage of 2 car wing mirrors, and the young person is aged 18 and has no previous convictions. So anyway, he was arrested for this offence, and the matter was brought to court, and the magistrates felt that the offence was serious enough for a community sentence and adjourned the case for a court report to be prepared by me. So there we are. So that's quite interesting, and I'm going to come back to this point later. Anyway, so let's go back to the offence. So this offence happened a few days before Christmas, really. The young lad, I'll call him Sid, he was 18 years old. He'd spent an evening in the pub with his friends, and he was going home with his friends, and he was doing them a favour. One of them, they were carrying a sofa as they're walking home, and in doing so, they accidentally damaged 2 wing mirrors, causing £80 damage. £80 damage. And when it was brought to his attention, he was immediately said he was sorry about the offence and that he was willing to compensate the victims. So anyway, he was arrested. He was the only one produced in court. He was the only one arrested for the offence, although there were 2 others. He admitted that he'd been drunk on that night, and sadly, he was quite in a difficult situation in that his father had passed away only 4 months before the offence occurred. And his father was quite an important figure in that he'd been brought up by his father, him and his sister. And sadly as well, I mean, they lived in rented accommodation, and 2 months after his dad passed away, the landlord evicted young Sid, I'll call him, and his sister from their accommodation. So he said that following the death, he was mindful of the fact that his sister was 8 months pregnant, and because of that, he felt it really important following the death to remain very calm, strong, and not display any emotion, not display his upset over his father's passing. But he said that his emotions had spilled over on occasion after he'd been drinking, and that he had drunk to excess on a few occasions following his dad's death. But following the offence, he cut down on his drinking significantly, hardly drank at all, and he'd been to discuss the issue with his GP and also asked for bereavement counselling from his GP. So he'd taken positive steps. Now, significantly, his parents split when he was only 7 years old, and his mother at the time had a severe alcohol problem and still does. And this very much coloured Sid's attitude towards drinking, that he had seen at first hand how terrible drink can affect people, in that his mum's health, through all this heavy drinking for many years, through having a heavy alcohol addiction, had damaged her health very, very significantly, and indeed her life expectancy was severely reduced due to this alcohol problem. So over the years he had little or no contact with his mum, but what contact there had been very painful indeed for him. And in fact, having witnessed what happened to his mum, he indeed had very respectful attitudes towards alcohol and was very careful. He's a young man who has been always actively employed since leaving school. He'd done a mix of agency work. He'd worked in offices doing clerical work, agency work, and he'd also done warehouse work. He got on well at one warehouse where they offered him a full-time job, and indeed he learnt how to drive the forklift truck there. But sadly, the company went bust, and owing him £2,000 in wages. So, but he's picked himself up and he's gone back to do agency work within offices again. Like I said, he and his sister were evicted 2 months following his dad's death, which I think was quite tough. But he and his sister, he went to move in with his sister and her partner, and young baby. And his sister, I've spoken with her, and she was very, very supportive of her brother. So his mum is clearly not capable of being supportive towards him and his sister because of her poor health and extensive drink problem. Sid has got no alcohol problem himself. He's at very low risk of reoffending and no previous offences, so there's no pattern of offending, and he appears quite low risk, really. So all in all, a lot of positive things about him. Really feel sorry for Sid in that, he's had a really tough time. So what I proposed in the court report was that he be given a conditional discharge and that he be ordered to pay compensation to the victim. And I'd offered him some advice about that. I said to him he could come and see me on a voluntary basis, on a short-term basis if we wanted it. And I also signposted him, gave him advice for other useful contacts that might help him. But all in all, I kind of wonder if this sort of case should be dealt with at a lower level, He had no previous convictions. I feel it was quite appropriate, really, for the police really to have dealt with this, because to push a case up to court is very expensive and time-consuming. The courts at the moment, for example, are crammed with cases. They're running months behind, very, very long waiting lists for cases to appear at court. And I actually think that this sort of case is better dealt with quickly and swiftly. And it would have been appropriate, really, for the police to organise direct reparation with the victims straight away, and for him to apologise directly to the victims. And I think that is actually, for an offender, quite embarrassing and tough to do. And it's quite a good exercise, and it deals with the case quickly. So I think it's a really good idea for him to directly apologise to the victim, which he was willing to do, and it would have been more cost effective. Just think of how expensive it is to list a case at court, to have several court hearings, and the cost of preparing a court report by a probation officer as well probably outweighs the cost that he'd done to the wing mirrors. And I think it would have been so much better for him to have some sort of reparation, direct reparation to the victims, and for him to have been given a caution, and also perhaps a bit of a welfare check. You know, perhaps he could have been guided to go and see his GP. Perhaps he could have, arrangements could have been made for have bereavement counselling by the police. Why not? But it seems very heavy-handed for this minor offence, really, to have it banged up to court and for the court to say, oh, we think this is serious enough for a community sentence for a first-time offender for, you know, something quite minor, really. So what's been happening over the years is what you call sentence inflation. For example, community service was brought in as a direct alternative to custody, but now the courts are wanting to give it to lower offences, and you've got sentence inflation, and it's costing, you've got people all tied up in the prisons more and tied up with probation more for lesser offences, and less resources going to probation and to the prison service. So also, for something to be dealt with at low level, the chances are that he won't reoffend, that it'd be salutary for him to apply to apologise to the victims. But to get somebody caught up within the criminal justice system actually sometimes heightens the risk of people reoffending. For example, if young Sid had been put on a community service project with a load of wrong-uns, possibly the chances are that he's more at risk of reoffending through meeting these wrong-uns. You know, sad to say. So all in all, I think poor show, banging this case up to court, for it to be hanging around court waiting, you know, much better to deal with something swiftly, make him swiftly apologise to the victims, pay the money to the victims. But the way it's dealt with, the victims don't get their compensation till months down the road either. And they don't get an apology, direct apology from the offender either. So all in all, bit heavy-handed. And can you imagine a small community saying, oh, you know, his dad's just died, can we offer him some help? Shall we shove him in the direction of going to see his GP? Shall we, you know, we know some counsellors, shall we arrange bereavement counselling for him? Wouldn't that have been better than banging up to court? Don't you agree? Anyway, do write your comments in underneath this, and please do subscribe. I'll be really grateful. And if you haven't had a look at my book, do have a look at it on Amazon. You'll be really welcome. Anyway, all the very best now, and have a great day. Cheers now. Bye-bye.